Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to That's a Take. I'm your host, Bruce James Bales, and today we are speaking with Hannah Rosalie Wright about writing independent short films. We will touch upon best practices, why reading other scripts is valuable, how to write for what you have access to, and how Hannah likes to provide feedback to other screenwriters. This is a really invigorating conversation that I hope you all can take something from, whether you're a writer or not. So with that, I will give you some of Hannah's background, and then we'll get right into it. Hannah's films are screened at the Filmapalooza International Film Festival, Snake Alley Festival of Film, Alternating Currents Film Festival, Sioux City International Film Festival, Kansas City Underground Film Festival, the Iowa Independent Film Festival, among others. Her film, Labor of Love, was a finalist for Best Short Film at the Twin Cities Film Festival in 2022. She was a 2021 recipient of the Greenlight Grant through the Iowa Arts Council, supporting her project, Daughters. Whether it's through poetry, photography, music, filmmaking, or a conversation over a good cup of coffee, Hannah hopes to share stories that mean something to her for the rest of her life. And with that, let's get into my conversation with Hannah about writing independent short films. I grew up on the radio, and I think that's another reason why I like doing this. But anyways, yeah, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're here with Hannah Wright, and so we're going to talk today about writing short films, and specifically a perspective of being a writer-director and writing films that can actually be made with little to no money, because that's kind of where we all start, right?
Yeah.
So super excited to have you. Just for context, Hannah and I wrapped about a month ago a short called Still Life that she wrote and directed. So we'll refer to that for some of these answers to just kind of have a specific project to talk about. But why don't we start with that? Tell us a little bit about the short film Still Life that we just wrapped.
Yeah, so the film is about a man who is struggling to reconnect with himself and his son after experiencing a loss. And he kind of begins that journey through picking up an old hobby of his.
Yeah.
And it's about 17 minutes long. Yeah.
And we made it here in Des Moines, Iowa. Mm-hmm. And I'm just saying that for context, because Hannah and I will probably refer to this film quite a bit in this conversation. So Hannah was the writer and the director of the film. And Hannah, where did this particular script come from? And more so, like, where do you find inspiration? Is it a story, a character, a feeling? Kind of what gets you going on the writing process when you're going to start writing a short?
Yeah, I think all of the shorts that I've written that have been made into short films come from either something in my life or a friend's life, or something that usually it's just like a story or like a thread of something that keeps needing to be pulled at before it, unravels. But Still Life I wrote it in March. I started writing it in March of last year. Or in May of last year, I mean. And 2 months before that, my mom died. Mm-hmm. And then a couple months later, I ended up going on this trip with my dad. And during that time, I think it's always like, let me try to think of how to put this. So for me, sometimes like the kernel of a short film or a story just kind of pops up out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And during that trip, this trip to Florida that I went with my dad and my now husband, there were a couple ideas that popped, to continue the analogy. Mm-hmm. And all of them had to do with some things that either during that first week after my mom died that happened to me or to someone else in my family. And so I actually wrote 2 short scripts in one night.
Oh, wow.
I ended up staying up way too late. And so I wrote out the 2 short scripts, and one of them was kind of more complicated. And I knew it was something that I was like, if I were to do this script, it would take a lot of more pre-production, mm-hmm. a lot more locations. Like, it was a little bit more complicated. And then the script that became Still Life, which at first was called Rest. And I actually had the idea, excuse me, I actually had the idea initially because that first week I just couldn't fall asleep a lot of the time. So at first it was kind of focused on Gareth's insomnia, or his, like, you know, just restlessness and inability to fall asleep. But so it was a very different script at that time. And both of the scripts, I kind of wrote it out and then they were both coherent scripts, but the only one I really shared was what became Still Life. And that one I pictured in my sister's house. And that one, it was more like, okay, there's like 3 characters, 1 location. At first there were 2 locations, and then I simplified it even more. But it still didn't feel quite right to me. And so kind of in the coming months, I was thinking about it and wanting to make it into something. I think it was just like maybe a month later where the idea of him having this hobby, like he's a hobby painter, came up, and it kind of felt like it tied everything in together from like a, just from like a character aspect and a story aspect. And so once that piece fell into place, I was like, oh, this is something that I think would be worth making.
That's really interesting. There's a lot for me to unpack there in that process, which is like, I loved your analogy of like this thread that sort of needs to be pulled. And it's interesting because I feel like that with the scripts that I've written, they honestly, they sometimes take me a long time and then they don't. It's like, it's almost a pressure cooker moment, to go on the kernel analogy, where it has to be like the right time for these things. And it's interesting that you also had like the forethought to say, oh, this script is good, but it's pretty complicated. Maybe we should do the more simple one, which is something that I think when people start their careers, that's a good approach, right? Is like doing a more simple script, more contained, less moving parts. So that's really interesting. And you kind of already touched on like my next question, which is, after you've written a script, are there things that you'll change about a script to make it more doable? Like, are you open to that? Or like, obviously story is first, but do you sometimes read a script you wrote and like, oh, I don't think I can do that, I have to reevaluate?
I think there's a balance of that, because like, if it doesn't compromise like the initial vision, I do, like when I first write something, I don't necessarily want to think of like, I'm shooting it this weekend, or, you know, like I need to think of how to practically do it. And I try to be more imaginative and more like, but it actually, because when I'm writing a script, I like to visualize how it plays out, and knowing a location helps that. So it's actually, I feel like sometimes I have to visualize some location or some space in order to even write the script, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think with a script, like, I think if there's too much of that compromise, then maybe it's just not the right time to make it. But I think if it's something like, I don't know, there's like flexibility, I think, that needs to be had. Like, even to use Still Life for an example, like, I would have loved if the bedroom was much bigger and we could have gotten higher for some of those shots and had more of that space. But there were things about the room that, you know, I had visualized it there. And I really liked the wood walls and stuff. So, and also not to, overcomplicate, the shoot that was already in motion too. So it's one of those things where it's like you just, accept it and welcome it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you answered that question the way you did too, because it's not the stance of myself or the stance that we're pushing that you should write just simple scripts, but a story, like, let the story come out. But a lot of what we're trying to focus on, I think, in our careers is like finding that balance that you talk about, where it's like we're not compromising the story because we don't think we can get this location, but sometimes it's wise to start with an idea that is tangible, like your sister's house, you can make a movie in. And also like very comfortable environment too, which is nice to have. It felt very like familial, the whole time, and just eating meals together in the house, and it was great. So
Yeah.
when you are writing shorts, at what point in the process do you share the script? Like, how long do you typically spend with it before you'll let someone else have eyes on it?
Let me think about this, because I think usually it's not until a few drafts in, because I feel like the first draft is just a mess, Like sometimes for me, I think it's valuable just to get something on paper, even if what I'm writing is like, like I'm not writing exactly the dialogue I'm writing. They say something like this, or, like maybe I write a note where it's like, I don't know what happens here, whatever.
I've read a script, I think, I think Still Life, a version.
Probably.
There was a note in there that was sort of like, I'm not sure what we're doing yet here.
Yeah. Because that's what a lot of, like some of the early drafts, because for me, it's like, I think better to get just something on paper, because then you can work with that. Like, I think it's better to work with more than less. And sometimes, I think it's also important for me to have, for the story and the script and the characters to have some sort of identity before I hand them off, for, to have comments or critiques, or just so it doesn't lose that sort of why I wanted to make it, or, what the story is. But I think like earlier, there's like a balance. Maybe for me, it's like maybe like, oh, this is like the third draft actually, where I start to share it and start to, and usually I'll have like, I'll know like what my questions are about it, or like where I'm like, okay, this seems a little weak, or, I have a question about this. But I also like just to hear what stands out to whoever's reading it.
Do you usually reserve those questions for after someone reads it, or do you sometimes lead with those questions?
Sometimes I lead.
Okay.
But if it's something like, I think so with Still Life, for instance, an early draft, it was, instead of a son, it was a daughter. And then I changed it. And I think there were a couple people that I sent that to where I was like, I changed a big thing. I'm curious if you can guess what it is, or something like that.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing to do, because I from my writing experiences, like, you're sometimes just like, I don't know if this is working or not, and just hearing it from someone else like frees you from this, I won't call it torment, but this like nagging, I don't know if this works, feeling. But like, when you send a script to someone, are you asking for specific critique sometime? And more so, like, what is good critique to you? Like, when you read someone's comments, like, what type of comments really stick out as really helpful to you?
So yeah, usually I feel like when I ask for someone to read a script and ask for comments and critiques, I do have like those questions, very specific questions, and I like to kind of not guide, but like just so if I'm handing someone a script, it's not like, oh, what could you talk about? Sometimes I think it's helpful for the person who's reading it to know what I'm looking for, and then also to open up and be like, well, but anything you see that you think needs, addressed or whatever, And I think the most helpful comments to me are, or when I'm trying to give feedback too, I keep in mind that it's like I'm not the writer, so it's not like, what would I do, But I think if something's not working for me, I want to ask more questions on like, who is this character? Maybe share like my reactions, like, this character did this and I feel like I don't know who this person is, or, whatever the issue is. Or, so I think like it's, again, like, I think comments that are, I think just curious about, okay, why do you want to write this? What is this actually about? How do you like hone in on that and sharpen your script in that way? Yeah.
That was a great answer. I think being curious is that's a really great way to look at providing critique for a short. And I really like this idea of asking people questions. And myself as a cinematographer, that's typically my first reaction to scripts as well, is to just ask questions, not really to provide what people might call constructive criticism or feedback. It's more like, what does this person want? What are they willing to do to get it? What's the central theme of this script for you? Those sort of more emotional, poetic based questions. So that, I think, is a really helpful tip for people to just like think that way instead of thinking about what they like or don't like, thinking it more about from the perspective of the character and like what they go through in the text.
Yeah, I agree. And I think another thing too that I'll add is when I'm writing my own scripts and when I'm reading other people's scripts, like I think another thing to focus on is like what will be useful when we're on set. Mm-hmm. Like, because I think a script is different than a novel. It's different than, you know, a poem or something, mm-hmm. where it's like all the information that you need paired with like the shot list and whatever else you're using. So if it's helpful in the script to say like you can see this here or mm-hmm. This person walks from here to here, I think that's another thing that I think just from a script perspective, like I think it's helpful feedback. Like if someone reads my script and they are able to say to me like, I can't quite visualize this, or where are they at? Like if there's like confusion mm-hmm. On what they're seeing when they're reading it, I think that's something that can, especially for a script, I would say, just because I think it is like a guide when mm-hmm. you're on set.
Yeah. So when you're writing a script, you're not afraid of describing action. You're not afraid of saying this is on the table. Those things are sort of guiding markers that you then hope help the cast and crew to understand what it is you're trying to go for.
Yes, and I think it'd be different if I was writing something that someone else was directing, mm-hmm. But I'm kind of writing and directing. So I'm kind of like, while I'm writing, I'm also thinking about, visually how it looks, or what if this item is important, or if this person's face is important in this mm-hmm. particular time, or so I write that in. But I think if I was writing and I was giving the script to other directors, then I think maybe it would be a different type of writing, or I'd think about it just a little bit differently, where I wouldn't try to micromanage in the script
yeah. and
tell them how they need to shoot it kind mm-hmm. of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And for clarification, I think I know the answer to this, but you've edited most of the films you've made too, if mm-hmm. not all of them, right?
Most of them. Yeah, most of them.
So you really see everything from start to finish, which I think is making this an infinitely more interesting conversation, because we can sort of pop into the different parts of filmmaking and refer back to writing, mm-hmm. which I think is a really helpful thing for people to hear, is like, if you think about it from that perspective, like it probably will make your film better too, mm-hmm. because you're thinking about it as like, how am I going to make this? What's it going to look like? What are the characters doing? Where are they moving from point A to point B? And then like going back to like, knowing your location, how to describe that in the script because you've been there and mm-hmm. you know it. So I think that's like, you're doing a lot of things that Marissa talked about in the first mm-hmm. episode, which is like using what you have to make films. Mm-hmm. Is that something you think about when you write, like a little bit? Is that something that really drives the writing sometimes?
Yeah, I would say so. Sometimes it's the location that inspires a scene, or inspires like a feeling or something, Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think locations are, or even like I've also written scripts with a particular actor in mind, where it's like, oh, this person that I've worked with before, mm-hmm. I can picture them as this person, and so I'm writing it thinking about them. Sometimes it's hard when I don't have that. Sometimes I have to picture someone else, like who I'm like, this any made up person, and kind of write to kind of feel like I know a character. And then that's also when you're actually making it, then you have to give up your ideas and embrace the reality of, what this film and what the story will look like. But your question, what was your question? Like,
using things that
Oh, yeah.
that you have, which you answered, like, we used your sister's house for still life, which is a location that you had access to. But I think what your answer was once again more interesting, which is like, for me, I almost always have to write with someone in mind. It's really strange. Like, I have a really hard time coming up with the character qualities without having someone in mind to play these characters. And a lot of times when I've written shorts, I already know who I want to play the character. So they're often the people that get the script first. Have you ever like written something and sent it to actors before you send it to crew, or is that something that you haven't done?
Yeah, especially if I'm asking an actor to act in something, like pretty early on, I'll be like, here's the script, let me know what you think, are you interested? Like, because I think for me, when I'm making these characters, I like to have, this idea of who this character is, but I also like that collaboration with the actors where it's like kind of giving that character to them and hearing, them think about or develop who this character is as well. Kind of like there's a collaboration there as well. So I think not the sooner the better, but I think earlier on, I want, them to feel like they can, they also know this character.
Sometimes I feel like there's this like veil of writing, right? That it's this like very mysterious thing. But I found that the best times that I've had with writing is the times I sat down and treated it more like a work, and you talked about it a little bit, like sitting down and getting something on the page. Can you talk about like do you have a set writing schedule? Is it just when you feel it? Do you force yourself sometimes? How do you get through those sort of road bumps that kind of prevent you from getting any words on the page?
Yeah. So, I don't. That's the short answer. No schedule. Okay. But when I was younger, so I feel like ever since I could write, I was writing. I used to write every day. I used to write poetry, and then when I was in college, I journaled every day, and that was just free writing, here are the thoughts in my head and very like unedited type of things. And then when I first was interested in writing scripts, I tried. Like I was like, I'm just going to keep trying to write scripts. And I have so many scripts that are just have hit roadblocks, and it's like they'll probably never see the light of day, like half-baked and, just kind of. But I think, so right now, like I don't have like a set schedule. And when I've written stuff in the past, it's been, like I'll, there was another short film that I made where I was getting a massage, and the short film idea came to me, and I just watched the whole short film in my mind as I was getting the massage. And when I came home, I spent like a couple hours and just wrote it all out. Nice. How it's kind of a weird thing like that where for me, I think I'll get like inspired by something, and then I'll just have to write then. I don't think it's the healthiest thing.
I know a lot of people that write like that though. That it's not regimented, it's when it's there. Yeah. When inspiration strikes.
Yeah, and it's like it just has to come out right then and there, and like but right now I'm trying to work on writing a feature-length film, and that one I think will take more because it's an idea I've been in various forms that I've been trying to work on for probably the last 3 years or so. And I think something that's been helpful for me is I'm taking a class right now that's kind of forcing me to like slow down and like, kind of make, almost in a way, spend time and make decisions about like who this character is and what happens and stuff like that. So I think structure is good. I used to, for a while, I had a regular time. I would go to my local neighborhood coffee shop, and I'd spend like a couple hours writing on Saturdays. But just, different times of life. Yeah. And sometimes it's been, so when I was writing Still Life, I was kind of from that May until August, I think, when I had like more of like a final, like the idea was blossomed. I tried to write weekly where I was like, okay, here's the script that's kind of problematic and I don't know how to fix it, but I'm going to spend some time with it, spend some time with some other scripts, and then.
Yeah, it's that's what I mean about it being mysterious, is like, I'll try to write, I'll put it on my calendar, like, you're going to write today. And then whatever's in charge of that creative sphere is just like, no, you're not going to write today. And then 2 weeks later, when I'm like playing hockey, I'm on the bench and I'm just like, oh, that's it. I better remember this because I'll have to write that down.
Yeah.
And often in scenarios where you can't write the thing, I feel like it's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you, to like, quote unquote, learn the craft of screenwriting, are there things that you've done? I know you talked about the class, which I'd love you to expand upon that, what that is, because I think specifically in filmmaking, we can kind of get caught in this like the speed of working on commercials and like doing all these things and forget to like educate ourselves and like use the resources. So are there resources that you have used in the past that you're using now that you thought were really effective in helping you?
So I think, when I first was interested in, like, I want to write something, I had written a bunch of stuff when I was younger, but not a screenplay. I think it was really intimidating to me because it was like, you have all these technical things on the page and like, that this fear of getting it wrong or being incorrect, And I think reading screenplays helped a lot. So like, looking up different movies I was interested in reading. And so reading it kind of helped get like okay, this is kind of the rhythm, and, different writers have, different ways of writing, but sometimes it's like I'll read a script. Like when I read the script for Hereditary, reading through it, I was like, wow, I can visualize how he's writing it. It's like I can see the whole thing. So like, yeah, some scripts have felt like page turners where it's like I'm not thinking that I'm reading a script. I'm like visualizing it in my mind as I'm reading it. So I think I guess it was like a lot of it was practicing writing it, because I think like anything, it's like it feels clunky at first to write in that way, but then I think the more that you write, the more it just becomes like this natural thing that comes out. When you're thinking of something and you write it, you're not thinking like, oh, I need to put the header here and I need to, do these things. It just becomes more of a language that you know.
We've kind of talked about this, but like when you get a script, how do you try to give someone good feedback and good critique?
If I'm reading a script and I'm confused about what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, then I'll make note of that, kind of wanting to ask questions that help mold and get to the heart of like, who is this character? What is the story about? What is their relationship like here with this person, other person? Kind of those questions. And I think too, like genuinely wanting to know, like I love it when someone sends a script and they also send like a lookbook where they send like, this is the vibe I'm going for. These are other films that inspire it. Here's a playlist,
Yeah.
I think that's also really helpful.
And so when you're giving notes, the first time do you read the script all the way through? Do you break out the pen and write notes? Do you write notes on a separate piece of paper? And I know this is kind of a weird question, but I'm curious, like your actual physical process when you read a script, like how are you ingesting that and taking notes?
Yeah, so usually I'll just read it through, like just as it is. And then if usually it's online, it's electronic, so I don't have like an actual script where I'm writing with a pen. So I'll like put it into Google Docs, and then I'll do track changes, because I want whoever's script it is to be able to see everything that, like what the changes are, so they can figure out what they want to do with it, So I do enjoy like the making things technically correct too. So if there's something like that, like, oh, this needs to be, this formatted differently or whatever, like making notes there. But everything that, and then some grammatical things. If it's not like a word choice thing, it's more of like, oh, forgot a period or something.
Yeah.
But then I think everything else that I have would just be like a comment. So I'd just make like a note using Google Docs or something and write my comments here, and then,
Yeah. I have to print it out unless it's a feature, and then I'm like, I'm saving the ink
Too
in the
many,
paper.
yeah.
I have to take notes, but I'm similar to you, and I read the script all the way through a couple times before I make any notes. But yeah, it's interesting. I think it's interesting to me that our conversation kind of takes us back to like critiquing other people's stuff and giving feedback, because it comes back to this idea of reading like other people's screenplays. And I just think that it's really an important thing to do. But for you, like when you're writing your own stuff, are there references in your mind already before you write, or do you ever have an instance where you're writing, you're like, oh, this reminds me of this? And how do you sort of react to that when that happens?
Both.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
It's in that process too, where sometimes I'll be in the middle of writing have written something that I'm, in the process of writing, and I'll see a movie. I'll be like, oh, that was beautiful, and it reminded me of this. So then I have everything kind of in a document where it's like, okay, these movies, these songs. And so, yeah, it all kind of comes together at different times. Like sometimes it could be, let me try to think of how to put it. Sometimes the inspiration, the references, they are there at the very beginning and they spark the story. And then sometimes it's later on, there's a missing piece, and then something comes along and it's like, oh, that influenced the missing piece. And then sometimes I've also written scripts and shown it to people, and they've been like, you should watch this, or you should, think about this. And then it's another reference that's like, oh, that's great inspiration.
Yeah, so it comes from it's like writing itself, it kind of comes from everywhere, and there's no telling, Kind of getting to like the tail end of the conversation here. Why do you write short films?
And it's a good question, because I feel like making anything, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of time and effort and energy and thought. But I think for me, I just really love the medium of filmmaking, and I've always loved writing, even before I knew that I wanted to make movies, So writing and kind of getting into another world in my head, like that was always something that I knew about myself and was drawn to. And I think when I first realized that I loved directing and I wanted to do that more, and to me it was like the two were never, I never wanted to separate the two, I guess. I remember being a kid and like reading books, and I'd visualize it, and sometimes it'd be books that were movies, and I'd see the movie and I'd be like, this isn't right. This is not the right casting.
That's amazing.
But and I was always really picky about movies when I was a kid. I always had opinions, and I thought I just hated movies, but I just never saw the right ones or realized, like, you can watch a movie like you read a book, just very critical, and, very, that's the stuff that I love about movies. So I think as an art form, and as, like, I feel this, need to process and think about, I guess, the things that I care about, like the questions that I have. I think there are many, more themes and stories that I would love to explore one day through film. And I think for me, it's part of it's like, I feel like it's very satisfying for me as a human being to make art this way. And I love the collaboration. I think there is something about writing and getting, again, like, having those early drafts where it's just kind of in my own head, and like, it's nice to like share that and to sort of like, work with people like yourself and, who is also an artist and has a skill set and like can, have this ownership and part of this story that is bigger than just like, here's my, a script is not meant to just stay a script. I think, it's meant to like become this thing that other people have joined in, if that makes sense. So I love that part of it too, where it does feel like it's, an art form that, brings all these people together who are good at what they do and have their own whys. So for me, it's probably just like a want for connection too, like with other creatives and with the people who are eventually going to watch the movie. And it's like, in a way, it's like, here's a little part of me that maybe is also like a little part of these other people. Maybe it's a little part of, the people who are watching it.
That's what it is. That's the beauty of it. All these artists coming together to work on one thing that has a greater meaning than themselves. Yeah. That was the end of the podcast because that was such a wonderful answer. I am Bruce James Bales. This was Hannah Rosalie Wright, and that is a take.